God of War Lao Fei was revealed at the end of Sony's latest State of Play presentation, and it sure looks like a really expensive video game. From a graphical standpoint, it's very impressive. It's reportedly been in development for years, and it sure shows. So am I excited about it? Not really. The combat looks cool, and I do like a good character action game, but my ambivalence isn't with the gameplay. It's with the fact that it seems you're going to be spending just as much time watching it as playing it. They set up the reveal as
more than 20 minutes of uninterrupted gameplay.
But this turned out to be about 15 minutes of cutscenes and 5 minutes of brief interaction. Which, to be clear, I don't necessarily have a problem with that. This isn't a video critiquing games that have really long cutscenes. My problem, and what I'm going to be covering in this video, is that it feels like 9 times out of 10 when a company makes a heavily quote-unquote cinematic game, a game you watch as much as you play, I find the parts you watch deeply uninteresting. I'm a huge fan of video games. I'm 43 years old and I've been playing them since I was a kid. But I'm also maybe even a bigger fan of movies. I love watching them analytically, critically. I like to consider how the people who made the movie, particularly the director, decided to show us what they're showing us. As Martin Scorsese once said, cinema is a matter of what's in the frame and what's out. What makes a movie cinematic, at least the kind of cinema that I particularly enjoy, is when you can clearly see there were people behind the camera making specific choices. Choices in how shots are composed, in how actors are blocked, choices in editing rhythms, in cinematography, in how information is visually revealed. And I feel like having these two lifelong passions, video games and movies, gives me an interesting perspective when it comes to games that go for a cinematic style. To say it plainly, in my humble opinion, well, not so humble, or I wouldn't be going through the tremendous effort to make a video essay to state it, I think most cinematic games are not very good. At least the parts of them that purport to be cinematic. Let's look at a clip from, let's just pick The Last of Us. This is pretty conventional stuff. We have some establishing shots, setting up our 3 characters in the environment. But eventually and essentially, this settles into a pretty straightforward shot, reverse shot rhythm. Shot, reverse shot, shot, reverse shot. In terms of cinema, this is basically on the level of a CBS weekly procedural. It's fine. It's sturdy, but it's not very creative or interesting or noteworthy or memorable, at least not to me. Okay, but it's just a scene of 2 people talking, you may be saying out loud. How visually interesting can you really make that? Well, to answer that, I don't even need to turn to an example from an actual movie. Say what you will about Hideo Kojima, but when he pioneered the notion of a 15 minutes of cutscenes, 5 minutes of gameplay video game was Metal Gear Solid in 1998, he did so not just as a game director, but also a hugely obsessive cinephile. This is a guy whose Twitter bio reads 70% of my body is made of movies, who has weekly movie screenings in his office for his employees, who frequently posts film reviews on social media, who has included some of his favorite directors in his games. He clearly puts his love and passion and inspirations into his work, and it comes through. Even going back to that first Metal Gear Solid on the PS1 was its early, crude visuals of the time, the cutscenes felt cinematically rich somehow, cinematically intoxicated. Now, here's a clip from Metal Gear Solid 3. Just 2 people talking. But pay close attention. Look at how he moves the characters through the environment, making the blocking dynamic, setting up new compositions in the frame. When he cuts, it's not just shot, reverse shot. He's cutting to new angles that show both characters often in the frame at the same time. One might be close to the camera and the other far away, or one acts as a vertical division of the frame and the other moves from one side to the other. This is a director using all the tools of the craft of cinema to make something visually dynamic, visually engaging. You compare it to the earlier example from The Last of Us, and the only way I can think of putting it is it betrays that game's failure of cinematic imagination. This is a great example of what I mean when I say that if you want to make your game cinematic, you should first understand cinema. Okay, asshole, but what does that have to do with God of War? Aggressive, but you're correct. So far, nothing. But to get into why I personally find the God of War trailer kind of underwhelming, we have to take a pretty lengthy detour into a trend in filmmaking that's been bothering me. Back around the mid to late 2000s, a style of filmmaking became widespread that came to be known as chaos cinema. It was characterized by extremely short-length shots edited together as if in a blender. I'm sure you recognize it. It was probably best popularized by director Paul Greengrass in his Jason Bourne movies, and a lot of the movies that followed for the next few years were likely inspired by or just flat out imitating what he did. Now here's the important point. Any cinematic style can of course be done well or done poorly. I'm a fan of Greengrass's Bourne pictures and I think he's a good director. But this chaos cinema style quickly became a crutch used by directors who were, let's say, less imaginative. It was used to cover up the fact that they weren't actually directing. That is, again, making strong specific choices about what to show and why to show it. Instead, a lot of these chaos cinema movies were just getting coverage of a scene from a bunch of different angles and chopping them all together without much or maybe any thought into why one image followed into the next. And then came John Wick, the movie that I think popularized a return to longer takes, a steady camera, and intricate choreography shot in a way where you can actually see and appreciate everything that's happening. This then led to its own wave of copycats and imitators, and by the way, this is actually the second time in Keanu Reeves' career where he made an action movie that set the template for imitators for years to come. He did that twice. Genuine legend, give him his props. But I digress. And then at some point, sort of organically in the last few years, a new fad caught on. It wasn't enough to do longer takes. Now we need to do the longest takes. It was the rise of the lengthy oneer, the hallway fight in Daredevil, the 6-minute oneer from True Detective. And things have escalated from there. Every episode of Adolescence is one take. There was the absurdity of Sam Mendes' 1917 that plays out as if it's one take. To me, this idea of making a one-take movie is like deciding to write a novel with only one extremely long sentence. Why? The edit, like the period, exists for a reason. It's part of cinema. In my opinion, what's happened here is that the pendulum has simply swung from the extreme of chaos cinema as a crutch for the unimaginative to the extremely long oneer that is, in its own way, also a crutch. It feels not just overused, but specifically turned to when a director can't think of anything better to do. It's as if they're depending on the wow factor to fill in the creative void, even if what ends up on the screen looks like garbage. And this, at last, returns me to the problem with games like God of War. Here's a game that's meant to impress with its enormous budget worth of visual extravaganza, but I just see 15 minutes of a kind of run-of-the-mill oneer, closely following the main character from behind while peeking over their shoulder as they walk through a very pretty environment while talking to themselves a lot.
You know where I am?
And like I said before, any style can be done well or poorly. Kojima himself has heavily turned to the long take, but let's compare how he does it to how it's done in God of War. We'll look at the opening scene from Metal Gear Solid Ground Zeroes. Now this is a 9-minute shot, so we're going to speed through it to highlight a few key moments in the first half. Very quickly, notice how often the subject of the camera changes, and how new compositions are created and held for a few moments. These work as kind of individual shots in themselves within this longer shot. Notice also how the lights in the game are designed to mimic the kind of lens flares you get when shooting with an anamorphic lens. Nice. Now check this out. You get this wonderful moment where you see Skullface, and yes, that's actually his name in the game, reflected in this soldier's goggles. This is clever. This is visual wit. Okay, much later in the shot now, here's another moment where we see the XOF badge reflected in a mirror. So we got a visual motif going here. And then we get this nice stylistic flourish where the soldiers are walking dramatically towards the helicopter as Joan Baez Here's to You crescendos. Remember what I said about Kojima's cutscenes feeling cinematically intoxicated? All throughout this single shot, Kojima never forgets the actual role of a director, which is to create striking compositions and to tell a story visually in an interesting way. Now let's go back to God of War. After the opening with Kratos and his son, the trailer really begins with the camera just sort of hovering around our main character, with a little bit of shaky cam going on. I suppose the intention here is to capture the character's confusion and make the player feel the same thing, but it also kind of feels like the main purpose here is look how much she really looks like Deborah Ann Woll. Then we get this nice little moment when the creature emerges and there's sort of a rack focus effect. Not bad. But we're going to skip far ahead to the more dramatic part. She gets captured and we spend a good chunk of time with the camera following behind, looking over her shoulder. Gee, look at this big thing over here. Oh no, poor creature over there. There's again some shaky cam. Big explosion. Apparently even the Afterlife has exploding barrels. Or swirling and shaking was the camera. It's almost a combination of a wonder and a bit of chaos cinema thrown in. And frankly, I'm struggling to come up with more to say here because honestly, there's just not much going on that's interesting to me to comment on. Again, I want to be clear, I'm not criticizing the game's graphics. They're state of the art. What I'm unimpressed by is the artistic choices taken to create something that's supposed to be cinematic. At least, I think that's their intention. But the whole style of it, closely following our main character and peeking over their shoulder, as she's taken through this series of gee golly, look at that moments, feels more theme park ride than cinema to me. Now the thing is, am I surprised most cinematic video games are not very good cinema? Well, no. Most movies that come out in a year are not very good cinema. Look at any kind of art, any kind of medium. There's going to be a lot of stuff that ranges from mediocre to fine, and some that's just awful, and some that's really good. You know, a bell curve. So if a lot of movie directors are not making particularly great cinema, I naturally expect it to happen even less often in gaming, where quote-unquote good cinema isn't even the primary goal of the medium. But the thing is, no one is telling these game companies to make cinematic games. If they're going to attempt it, if that's their choice, I don't think they should be graded on a curve. It feels like these games have this presumed air of importance. Look at me, I'm real art because I'm like a movie. and they just don't earn it. Not in my eyes. And maybe that's really my only point here, is let's just be a little more demanding of what we expect from a cinematic game. I don't think that's unreasonable. Maybe this is all a really hot take, but hey, good way to get YouTube views. Hopefully. You may proceed to now tell me how stupid and wrong I am in the comments. Thanks for watching.